The U.S. Navy's most powerful fighter, the F/A-18 Super Hornet, isn't always used for combat. Despite its $70 million price tag and its design for air dominance, this fighter jet is often used for something surprising, serving as a flying gas station. This may sound like an absurd waste of resources, but it's a grim reality, one that the Navy has no choice but to accept. While we often admire the powerful aircraft that streak across the skies, few understand the true cost of keeping them in the air. We're talking about fighter jets that could be hunting enemy aircraft or dropping bombs, yet they are spending a significant portion of their operational time refueling others. So why does the U.S. Navy continue to sacrifice this formidable weapon in this way? The answer goes beyond budgets and fighter capabilities. To understand the truth, we need to look deeper at the logistics, the harsh realities of naval warfare, and the choices that led us to where we are today. Let's take a step back and examine the U.S. Navy's current dilemma and the strategic calculus behind the cost of these flying gas stations. In the next few minutes, we'll pull back the curtain on the logistics of the Navy's air operations, uncovering why the Super Hornet, a multi-role fighter, has to bear the weight of a mission it was never meant for. This isn't just a story about high-tech warfare. It's a story of survival, where the most advanced fighter jet on the planet is being stretched beyond its intended limits. On a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, the flight deck isn't just a launching pad for fighter jets. It's a carefully choreographed battleground where space is the ultimate currency. Here, the stakes are high, and every inch of the deck must be accounted for. The carrier is a 4.5-acre floating city, but unlike the spaces you're used to navigating, this one is defined by tension. Every move, every positioning of aircraft requires precision. Even a single misplaced tractor can delay the launch of a fighter. Miscalculate by just a few feet, and you shut down the whole operation. But the most critical bottleneck on the flight deck is the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye. Known affectionately by pilots as the Hummer for the sound of its turbopropellers, the E-2D is essential for airborne radar and surveillance. Yet to the deck crews, it's a different story. They call it the deck clogger. Its sheer size, even with its wings folded, makes it a physical roadblock. It's a monolithic, cumbersome presence that takes up valuable space that could be better used for strike fighters. Let's do the math. The F/A-18 Super Hornet, sleek and nimble, has a wingspan of 44 feet 9 inches. The E-2D, on the other hand, stretches a daunting 80 feet 7 inches. The difference is staggering. A single Hawkeye on the catapult track means 2 fighter jets can't be launched. So, when the flight operations officer looks at the E-2D, they're not thinking about its radar capabilities. They're thinking about how quickly they can get it off the deck to clear space for real combat. And it's not just the size that complicates matters. Unlike modern jets like the F/A-18 or the F-35, the E-2D lacks an Autonomous Auxiliary Power Unit, APU. This means it can't start its engines on its own. Instead, ground crews have to bring in a massive mobile power unit, a huffer, to provide the necessary power to start up the Hawkeye. This creates a phenomenon known as tethering. The aircraft becomes dependent on this external source of power, restricting where it can be parked on the deck. Essentially, the E-2D is tethered to a spot, unable to move freely and clogging the flow of operations. The real danger comes when the Hawkeye's 8 massive NP2000 propellers begin to spin. The sheer force of their rotation creates a lethal exclusion zone around the aircraft. Deck crews can't drive vehicles past it, can't tow jets around it, and certainly can't move any fighters through the arc of those propellers. When the E-2D powers up, the entire deck comes to a grinding halt. In this confined space, every second counts. To the handler, the most effective strategy is brutal but necessary. The first aircraft launched from the catapult is almost always the E-2D, not because it's tactically superior, but because it's the biggest roadblock on the deck. Once it's off the carrier, the flight deck clears up, and the fighters can move. The war can finally begin. But there's a larger, invisible battlefield awaiting beyond the deck. An even bigger challenge that the Navy must face. As the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union collapsed, the Pentagon began looking at its air power strategy and thinking it could do better. The fleet was getting older, and the budget was tightening. So the decision was made to streamline. Instead of maintaining a fleet of specialized aircraft designed for different missions, long-range bombers, dedicated tankers, submarine hunters, the Navy chose a more cost-effective, albeit risky, solution: the F/A-18 Hornet. It could do everything, or so they thought. The Hornet could dogfight, drop bombs, perform reconnaissance, and even refuel other aircraft. It was a one-size-fits-all solution. On paper, it was efficient. But in practice, this approach turned out to be more of a gamble. As we focused on the F/A-18 Hornet, the U.S. Navy gave up its specialized platforms. Aircraft like the A-6 Intruder, which had the range to strike deep into enemy territory, and the S-3 Viking, which not only hunted submarines, but also served as a highly effective tanker for refueling missions. These aircraft were not as glamorous nor as versatile as the Hornet, but they filled specific gaps that made the Navy's air operations more robust and adaptable. But after the Cold War, the Navy simplified its approach. The F/A-18 Hornet was meant to be the Swiss Army knife of naval aviation. But this efficiency came at a cost. By removing specialized aircraft from the equation, the Navy set itself up for a future problem that would come to a head decades later. Over-reliance on a single, multi-role aircraft to accomplish everything. What seemed like a reasonable cost-saving measure would soon reveal itself as a glaring flaw in the face of new, unexpected threats. Enter the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force, PLRF, and their game-changing weapon, the DF-26 missile, known colloquially as the Guam Killer. This missile has the range and maneuverability to threaten U.S. carriers from thousands of miles away. It's not just any rocket. This is a hypersonic missile, capable of altering its course mid-flight and hunting down moving targets like an aircraft carrier. The range of this missile, 2,500 miles, creates a kill box that stretches across the Pacific. This means that U.S. aircraft carriers must stay far out of range, hovering at the edge of this missile's reach, and risking the entire fleet's strategic advantage if they get too close. So, while the U.S. Navy focuses on the efficiency of its operations, the enemy has studied the math and exploited it. The over-reliance on multi-role fighters like the F/A-18, without the supporting aircraft needed for long-range operations, puts the Navy's strategic reach in jeopardy. And to make matters worse, the Navy now faces a problem. How to stay within the missile's range and still be effective? How do we maintain air superiority when our own planes can't reach far enough, fast enough? To understand the gravity of the situation, you have to grasp the scale of the problem. The solution to the PLRF's DF-26 missile isn't just a question of technology. It's a matter of sheer distance. The U.S. aircraft carrier can't simply sail right up to the enemy's coast. Doing so would invite a missile attack that could sink the fleet in a matter of minutes. Instead, the carrier must remain far offshore, at a safe distance of 2,500 miles beyond the reach of the DF-26. But this creates a new issue: the gap. The gap between the carrier, stationed in sanctuary waters, and the target is too wide for the aircraft to bridge on their own. The F-35C Lightning II, the Navy's most advanced stealth fighter, has a combat radius of about 600 to 670 nautical miles, far short of the 2,500-mile distance. So how does the Navy solve this? How do we bridge this deadly gap? This is where the complexity of modern warfare comes into play. The Navy's solution involves the use of the F/A-18 Super Hornet as a tanker, a compromise that seems illogical at first glance. The F-35C, which is supposed to be a cutting-edge stealth fighter, cannot carry external fuel tanks. because external tanks would make it visible to enemy radar, eliminating its stealth advantage. It's a catch-22. The most advanced fighter in the Navy can't make it to the target without refueling. But the F/A-18 can carry the necessary fuel, and it can fill up the F-35C mid-flight, pushing the stealth fighter closer to the kill box, where it can strike with devastating force. Yet, there's a catch here too. The F/A-18, while versatile, wasn't designed for long, fuel-draining missions like this. Every time it refuels an F-35, it sacrifices its own range, as it carries extra weight and drag. These Super Hornets are pushed beyond their design limits, and the toll it takes on their structure is extreme. This is the reality of modern naval warfare. Even the most advanced weapons and fighters have limitations. The U.S. Navy has had to adapt in ways that have strained its resources, pushing the limits of its equipment just to stay competitive. And despite the technological marvels like the F-35C and the Super Hornet, the Navy is stuck in a vicious cycle of compromise and sacrifice. To understand the true cost of these operational compromises, we must take a closer look at the physical toll on the F/A-18 Super Hornet. Every time this aircraft launches from the carrier, it is subjected to extreme forces. The steam catapult hurls it from 0 to 165 knots in just 2 seconds. The F/A-18 is carrying additional fuel tanks to support long-range missions, and when it's loaded up with fuel, it's at its maximum takeoff weight. This is like an Olympic sprinter trying to run with a refrigerator strapped to their back. But then comes the catapult launch, an explosive force that shakes the aircraft to its core. The Super Hornet's titanium spine, the keel beam, is subjected to an immense amount of stress as the catapult accelerates it in mere seconds. With every launch, the forces at play twist and compress the aircraft's structure, damaging it in ways that can't be seen with the naked eye. After the launch, the Super Hornet enters a new kind of battle: drag. As it flies, the added fuel tanks create a massive amount of parasitic drag. The drogue basket, which is used to transfer fuel mid-flight, acts like a parachute, increasing the drag on the Super Hornet, making it harder to maintain speed and efficiency. At 300 knots, the drag is severe, with the wind turning the drogue assembly into a force of its own. This drag generates constant vibrations that rattle the airframe, affecting its structural integrity over time. But the real destruction comes at the end of the mission. After refueling another aircraft, the Super Hornet returns to the carrier, still laden with fuel. The deck is moving, and the plane must land in the most violent way possible: an arrested landing. When the Super Hornet slams into the deck to catch the arrestor wires, the kinetic energy transfer is immense. The shockwave travels up through the landing gear and rattles the entire airframe. Each heavy landing creates more structural damage than hours of normal flying. The Navy tracks this damage using a fatigue index, where flying straight and level is a 1, but a heavy trap is a 10, meaning a single rough landing causes 10 times more damage than a normal flight. With every heavy trap, the aircraft's lifespan is shortened. The F/A-18 was designed to last around 6,000 flight hours. But after enduring these brutal refueling missions, its lifespan begins to dwindle. Microcracks form in the aluminum, and the aircraft begins to deteriorate much faster than expected. The Super Hornet is essentially being tortured, its metal frame slowly dying to ensure the mission continues. This isn't just an unfortunate consequence of war. It's the inevitable result of the Navy's decision to use a multi-role fighter as a jack-of-all-trades. The F/A-18 Super Hornet was never meant to carry out the grueling role of a tanker, but it's been forced into that position because of the Navy's reliance on it. The more this fighter is pushed to its limits, the faster it will break down. The reality of the F/A-18's toll on the Navy's fighter fleet isn't just about physical wear and tear. It's also about the cost in financial terms. For every hour a Super Hornet stays in the air, the Navy is burning through approximately $17,000 in tax dollars. This cost isn't just for fuel or ammunition. It's the accumulated price of maintaining an aircraft that was never designed to endure the constant refueling missions, the violent launches, the stressful landings, and the high drag. The Navy's solution to this problem? Spend billions on trying to keep these fighters operational, even as they approach the end of their useful lives. Enter the Service Life Modification (SLM) program, a billion-dollar effort to extend the lifespan of the Super Hornet fleet. The process is labor-intensive and costly. The aircraft are stripped down to their skeletons. Every inch of the airframe is inspected for cracks, corrosion, and fatigue. The keel beams are replaced and the bulkheads reinforced. These aircraft are essentially rebuilt from the inside out, with the goal of extending their lives from 6,000 hours to 10,000 hours of flight time. Each of these rebuilds costs around $10 million per aircraft. That's a significant amount of money just to keep planes that were designed for a different era in the air, doing a job they were never truly built to do. This $7.8 billion program isn't about advancing military technology or replacing old equipment with new. It's about trying to fix the damage caused by years of relying on the A-18 for missions that require a completely different type of aircraft. It's a band-aid solution to a problem that could have been avoided if more specialized planes had been kept in service. In many ways, the SLM program highlights the deeper issue at play: the Navy's complacency in not addressing the fleet's needs decades ago. Now, the Navy is paying for that oversight, not just in dollars, but in the sacrifice of its most valuable fighter jets. The F/A-18 fleet is being patched up, piece by piece, as the Navy fights to keep its air superiority intact. But this is a temporary solution, one that comes at a steep cost and doesn't address the underlying problem of a fleet stretched too thin. The real crux of the issue lies in how the Navy is managing its most advanced stealth aircraft, the F-35C Lightning II. This fifth-generation fighter is a technological marvel. It is designed to be nearly invisible to radar, capable of striking with lethal precision and penetrating enemy defenses with ease. But stealth comes at a significant price. To maintain its invisibility, the F-35C cannot carry external fuel tanks. Those tanks would reflect radar signals and betray the aircraft's position. This is where the dilemma begins. The F-35C has a relatively limited combat radius, around 600 to 670 nautical miles, depending on the mission profile. The enemy's threat, however, lies far beyond that, and the Navy's carrier strike group cannot get any closer. To strike effectively, the F-35 must travel through the vast Pacific Ocean, but the gap between the carrier and the target, 2,500 miles, requires more fuel than the F-35 can carry on its own. The Navy's solution is to use the F/A-18 Super Hornet as a tanker to refuel the F-35 mid-flight. The F/A-18, despite being a fighter jet, becomes a lifeline, carrying extra fuel and allowing the F-35C to extend its range into the kill box, the critical 2,500-mile zone where the strike needs to happen. This tactic is called mid-course staging, and it is a brilliant workaround to the distance problem. The F-18 and F-35C launch together, with the F-18 flying ahead to refuel the F-35C at the 500-mile mark, far enough to stay out of the range of enemy radar. The F-18 returns to the carrier, while the F-35, now fully fueled, continues into the kill box, invisible and lethal. But the cost of this solution is significant. The F-18's role as a tanker is a physical and logistical strain on the aircraft. It's not designed for long-duration fuel tanking missions, and every time it performs this function, it experiences the same destructive forces mentioned earlier. The extra weight, the drag, the rough launches and landings, these all contribute to the Super Hornet's accelerated wear and tear. The dilemma becomes clear. To maintain global reach and air superiority, the Navy must sacrifice the longevity of its fighters. The F-35, while stealthy and advanced, is operationally limited by its need for refueling. And the F/A-18, despite its many roles, is being pushed to its limits, breaking down under the strain of these missions. It's a trade-off that the Navy has no choice but to make. To fully grasp the financial burden the Navy bears, we need to take a deeper look at the cost of keeping these aircraft operational. The F/A-18 Super Hornet may have been designed for multi-role flexibility, but the constant use of these fighters as tankers is taking a heavy toll on their structural integrity. And this toll is not only measured in time and wear, but in cold, hard dollars. The Navy is pouring billions into sustaining these aircraft far beyond their original service life. Every time an F/A-18 is launched from a carrier, it's not just a matter of fueling up and going into combat. The cost includes the ongoing maintenance to repair and replace parts damaged by the constant strain of high-stress operations, particularly the launches and landings that subject the aircraft to forces far beyond normal flight. The Navy has to factor in the costs of extensive rebuilds, the labor of personnel required to inspect and repair them, and the parts that wear out quickly due to the relentless missions. The Super Hornet, which was designed to last 6,000 flight hours, is now showing signs of failure long before it should, and the Navy is forced to spend even more money to keep it in service. This is where the Service Life Modification (SLM) program comes into play. The program is intended to extend the life of the Super Hornet fleet by giving it a second lease on life. But this comes at a staggering cost of roughly $10 million per aircraft. The SLM program isn't just about replacing engines or fixing damaged parts. It's about rebuilding the aircraft from the inside out, stripping it down to its skeleton and reinforcing every part that has been stressed to its limit. These planes are essentially being resurrected at a premium price, costing billions just to keep them in service for a few more years. The irony is that the Navy could have avoided this scenario entirely if it had kept its specialized aircraft in service. Aircraft like the S-3 Viking, the A-6 Intruder, and the K-6D Tanker were all designed to handle the tasks now being thrust upon the F/A-18 Super Hornet. Instead, the Navy decided to simplify the fleet for efficiency's sake, removing those specialized planes and relying solely on the F/A-18. Now, the Navy is paying the price for that decision. The billions spent on the SLM program are essentially a direct consequence of the Navy's previous decisions to streamline its fleet. This is a self-inflicted wound caused by decades of neglecting to account for the future needs of the fleet. The cost of fixing this mistake? $7.8 billion, just to keep a fighter jet flying when it should have been retired or replaced with more specialized aircraft. As we step back and take in the full scope of the situation, the picture becomes clearer. Maintaining a global military presence comes at an extraordinary price. The U.S. Navy's reliance on the F/A-18 Super Hornet as a multi-role fighter capable of refueling other jets, performing combat missions, and acting as a jack of all trades, has led to a strategic and logistical nightmare. The fighters are being pushed to their limits, and the cost of keeping them operational is staggering, not just financially, but also in terms of the wear and tear on the aircraft. The Navy's decision to streamline its fleet, cutting down on specialized aircraft like the S-3 Viking and A-6 Intruder, was an exercise in efficiency. But efficiency, as we've seen, can be the enemy of effectiveness. The over-reliance on a single aircraft type to perform multiple roles has led to a vicious cycle, where the F/A-18 Super Hornet, a fighter designed for combat, is being used as a fuel truck, damaging itself in the process and shortening its lifespan. The result is a multi-billion-dollar program to repair and extend the life of an aircraft that was never built for these tasks. The SLM program is essentially the Navy's attempt to apply a band-aid to a self-inflicted wound. We are spending $7.8 billion to patch up the damage caused by overextending these aircraft. damage that could have been avoided if the Navy had maintained its specialized fleet in the first place. Instead, the Navy is stuck in a cycle of repairs, pushing the Super Hornets to the breaking point, all while trying to maintain air superiority in a rapidly evolving strategic environment. The real cost of peace, as it turns out, is paid for in fatigue cracks and shattered keels. It's measured in billions of dollars, in the sweat of the maintainers who keep these overstressed planes flying, and in the lives of the men and women who rely on them. The A-18 Super Hornet is dying a slow death. Not because it is a bad aircraft, but because it is being used in a way it was never meant to be used. And yet, despite all the damage, the Navy has no choice but to keep it flying, because the cost of not doing so, of losing the strategic reach of the aircraft carrier, is far too great. In the end, this isn't just about military hardware. It's about the brutal calculus of war and the sacrifices required to maintain global peace. The F-A-18 Super Hornet, once the shining star of naval aviation, is now the grist for the mill, a reminder of the true cost of power and the price we pay to ensure the fleet stays afloat, no matter the cost. If you've been paying attention, you've seen the math. You've seen the real cost of freedom, measured not in heroic stories, but in the stress cracks of an aircraft's bones, in the loss of its youth long before its time. The military-industrial complex may look like a machine of progress, but it is, in reality, a grinder, slowly wearing down its own most valuable resources to ensure the continuation of a system that is, in many ways, unsustainable. The trade-off is inevitable, but it is also tragic. Now, when you see footage of a Super Hornet refueling another aircraft, take a moment to think about what you're really seeing. It's not just a fighter jet doing its job. It's a machine being pushed to its breaking point, sacrificing itself so that the Navy can maintain its strategic edge. And that, more than anything else, is what you need to remember when thinking about the price of military power.